Hello, and welcome to this Museum at Home webinar live from the Australian War Memorial. I'm Amanda Dennett, Head of Digital Experience. Today we'll be talking about Australians awarded the George Cross and Cross of Valour. 28 Australians have been awarded the nation's highest non-combat awards for bravery, and their stories are told in the new book for Gallantry, published by New South. In this webinar, we'll hear from Craig Blanch, who is the author of For Gallantry. Craig is a curator at the Australian War Memorial and one of the organisation's foremost authorities on the Victoria Cross, George Cross and the Cross of Valour. He is also the co-author of For Valour, Australians Awarded the Victoria Cross. Today, this is an interactive webinar. Please send us your questions by using the Q&A or chat window at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And we'll try to answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation this morning. Once again, welcome, and I'll now hand over to Craig.
Thanks, Amanda. What I'd like to start out with today is I'll give you brief descriptions of the awards. Many of you may not recognise these awards, so I'll just take you through each of them before we get into specific stories and recipients of the different medals. Now, predominantly this webinar is about the George Cross and the Cross of Valour, but I will introduce the Victoria Cross first because you can't really speak about one without at least giving a nod to the other. So to start with, I'll just present here the Victoria Cross. Now, these gloves are not an affectation. The Victoria Cross you're about to see is authentic. It's a specimen from Hancock's in London, who have been producing the Victoria Cross since its inception in 1856. Now, as you can see, it's quite a dull medal. When it was first trotted out to the public, it was met with a fair bit of derision and scorn. We have a red ribbon. Some might say wine red, some might say maroon. The warrant says red, so I'll stick with that. It has just a cross patee. You have a crown, a lion surmounted by a lion, and the simple words "for valour," and that was the reason why the first book in the series, I don't know if you can see that, it took its name from the inscription on the Victoria Cross.
You can just put it a little bit closer.
A little bit closer?
Yep, that's perfect.
Okay.
Yep.
So only about 1,360 of these Victoria Crosses have been awarded, 101 to Australians. So the distinction between this award and the next two I'm going to introduce, this can only be won in combat. It can only be awarded for extraordinary bravery in the face of the enemy. There is no other place that it can be, an action can be recognised. Now, second on the rank, we have the George Cross, rather plain, silver cross, a blue ribbon. It was instituted in 1940 during the Second World War at the height of the Blitz, where King George VI saw extraordinary acts of bravery. Now, there were quite a number of bravery awards available in the civilian sphere, but none of them truly captured the bravery that the King witnessed and was told about. So he decided at that point in time to make a preeminent award that would sit beside the Victoria Cross to recognise these people, both civilian and military. It was predominantly a civilian award. It was thought military would get small amounts of bravery away from the field of battle. As it's turned out, about 2/3 of the Victoria Crosses awarded have gone to people in the military. So here you have a silver cross, blue ribbon. There's a device on the front that has St George slaying a dragon and the inscription "For Gallantry," which of course we have as the title for the book here. In 1975, the Whitlam government brought in our own Australian Honours and Awards system. And when the Whitlam government brought this in, they created the Cross of Valour. And it was modelled, the whole system was modelled very closely on the Canadian system. Now, the Cross of Valour has quite a close relationship with the Victoria Cross for two reasons. One is early discussions around the Cross of Valour meant that there were thoughts that it would replace the Victoria Cross and have this one medal for valour in peacetime and in war. As it turned out, by the time of its institution in 1975, it was almost identical to that of the George Cross, of which it replaced. The inscription on the Cross of Valour is for valour, exactly the same as the Victoria Cross. With the conspicuous courage that is displayed by all these people in these books, many would be familiar with many of the Victoria Cross stories. But all the people in both books are really examples of, they exemplify courage. They're examples of our best selves. But when it comes to our non-combat awards, they're virtually unknown. And how many people would recognise the names Richard Richards, Lionel Matthews, Frank Duller, Alan Sparks, Horace Madden, Tony Taylor, or Darryl Tree? And if you got one or two of those names, you're probably doing quite well. But even the living holders of the awards that I've spoken to didn't know what these awards were until it was explained to them.
And why do you think that is, Craig? Is it because, I guess with the Victoria Cross and other medals, perhaps won in conflict, that they're worn on Anzac Day and Remembrance Day and other activities? Is it that we don't have that same sort of national reflection on these other awards of bravery, or what do you think that is?
Yeah, I think that's probably key to it. With the Victoria Cross, we have this overarching narrative of conflict and major battles, and they get commemorated annually. And the recipients of the Victoria Cross, quite rightly, are commemorated each time that this happens. With the George Cross and the Cross of Valour, many of the actions happen in isolation. There's no overarching narrative to it. So they will do these extraordinary acts of courage, then it will hit the headlines perhaps and fairly quickly dissipate out of the national consciousness. Yeah. But the pity of it is that these three awards, the Victoria Cross, the George Cross and the Cross of Valour, they rank higher than all other honours and awards in the Australian system. Yet these people are virtually unknown. So these are some of the bravest people that you probably have never known. And
I guess that's what the book's aiming to kind of shine a light on some of their activities.
It is, and it's such a different book. You go into For Valour and it is stories of extraordinary courage in battle, and it's this, you have the protagonist and you have the heroes that go and but when you get to For Gallantry, a lot of the time you don't have an enemy to overcome. It can be a situation. A lot of the time you overcome what's in yourself to be able to forge ahead. We've got examples here of POWs who, after months of the most horrendous torture, died rather than give up on their ideals. And there's stories from shark attacks, there's stories from months and months on the ice in Antarctica, of just the drive and the human spirit that comes to the fore. And I think Richard Richards said it best, and he was the first one he's the first entry in the book. after almost 2 years on the ice under the most horrendous conditions, and they lost 3 of their party. And in the end, what they did accomplish was unnecessary. Yet years later, he was asked, you know, how do you feel about that? And he says, it wasn't unnecessary. We completed the task we were given. It was something that the human spirit accomplished. And it really resonated. And when I started and when I went through researching, I couldn't believe how little we know of the people that have been awarded our highest non-combat awards for bravery. With the Victoria Cross of 1900, we've been awarded 101 Victoria Crosses. With the George Cross and the Cross of Valour, since 1915, only 28 have been awarded. That's extraordinary. And when we look at the George Cross, there's 23 awarded. With the Cross of Valour, that's 5 Cross of Valours over 45 years. Yeah. And yet I would be very surprised if the majority of people recognised one of their names. Yeah. And that really came across to me when I was going through the book. And one of the people that I picked out today is William Mciloney, and he's sort of the everyman, I guess. Or he could be an everyman, and I think again with For Gallantry, the entries in here are more relatable to the normal person out there in the street. You know, what would I have done in that situation? But William Mciloney, he was a South Australian, and he was educated at the Barton School, Adelaide School of Mines. He went on to train as a mechanic, but there's no indication that he ever actually completed any of his studies and got any official transcripts. So he opened his own garage, motor garage, and but during the Depression, he, like so many others, found the going hard, and he's bankrupt in 1936. So he joins the RAAF as a fitter, and again you get this sense of this guy's maybe not the ordinary man, but an extraordinary guy. He's got no formal qualifications. He goes in as a fitter in 1936. Now on the 31st of August the following year, he is in the observer's seat of a Hawker Hurricane a Hawker Demon, a biplane. Now, on the image that you can see there, the back seat passenger is facing forward. Well, in this instance, the observer was facing backwards, and William was in that seat, and that his aircraft, along with two other Hawker Demons, were down in Hamilton in Victoria and about to take off. Now, the first one took off, no problem at all. The second one took off, and William was in the last one. The second one took off, got to about 60 metres, when it stalled and just plunged back to the earth and exploded into a fireball. Now, the pilot for William, he couldn't see this. He was taxiing out, and Mciloney was looking back at this unfolding drama behind him. And just as the aircraft hit, he just yelled out, "Stop!" and discarded his parachute he had at the time. He jumps out of his taxiing aircraft, and he runs about 300 metres towards his fireball. Now, in that 300 metres, he could do a lot of thinking in 300 metres. So this isn't just this reckless valour that he just jumps into. He knows he's running towards a furnace. And when he gets there, he sees Norman Torrens Witherow, Sergeant Norman Torrens Witherow, standing in the back seat of the wrecked aircraft getting out. So he goes around to try and get the pilot When he goes there, the heat is incredibly intense, as you can imagine. He jumps straight into the fire to drag this pilot out, and a few feet out, one of the fuel tanks nearby explodes. So he drags him out a little bit further before he himself is overcome by flames and fire and heat. And the next thing he knows, he's waking up in Hamilton Hospital. And unfortunately, one of the first things he learns is Norman Torrens Witherow, who he believed was getting out. His ankle was actually captured within the twisted wreckage of the aircraft, so he never did get out. And the pilot died himself. And so this news got out, and obviously his incredible bravery. And the Royal Humane Society said, look, this person has to be recognised somehow. So the Minister for Defence wrote a recommendation to the Prime Minister, recommending him for either the Albert Medal or the lesser-known Empire Gallantry Medal. I suppose a little bit quirky that at the time the Defence Minister and the Prime Minister was the same person, Joseph Lyons. So Joseph Lyons has actually written to himself to recommend William for the award. The award was presented to the Governor General. It went through the channels, and he was awarded the Albert Medal for bravery. And much later in 1971, the Albert Medal was actually discontinued, and all living surviving recipients, such as Mciloney, were deemed from that point to be George Cross recipients. But his life went on from there, and we're talking about largely self-educated man. He had a photographic memory. He would read to the early hours of the morning. He couldn't consume enough knowledge. And but he had a very troubled relationship with his children, and we don't know what effect the accident and the action that he took and the subsequent death of the two people had on William. But his wife did say later that he was changed. He was a different man after that. Mm. But going through all this, going through that, having to live with that, he just drove himself on to the point where this unqualified mechanic, he became the commander of the Aircraft Research and Development Unit in Victoria, and was eventually recognised with an OBE. So a lot of the people that we find in this book carry a cost to what they did.
And because you do think that winning or being awarded one of these honours can be life-changing in itself, in that at times it can open up opportunities and experiences that people may not have had.
Yeah.
But that does come at a significant cost. I mean, they are awarded for really difficult moments, and for putting yourself in danger.
Yes.
In order to save others. And so, it's quite a, like a dichotomy there of extreme difficulty and opportunity. And, the way that people deal with that, I'm sure must be really varied throughout the
book. Yes, there's some that seem to just get on with life. And I look at the Royal Australian Naval Volunteer Reserve George Crosses that are in there. And they seem to just come home and get on with life. It's almost as though there's this club or camaraderie among these sort of four people. But I guess they were in this war, they were all in it together to a certain extent. But a lot of the actions in here are probably most traumatic event these people will ever go through in their entire life. But costs are extraordinarily high, be it emotional or physical. And that's no more than Raymond Donahue, who was one of 9 posthumous George Cross recipients. Now, for those that don't understand, posthumous really means that the action for which they were awarded, they didn't survive. Now, Raymond Donahue, he was known to his family and friends as Puddin. I don't really know why, but he was affectionately known as Puddin. And he served in the Second World War, and he served in Greece, and he became a prisoner of war, and he spent the rest of the war in Austria. But he came home within a couple of years. He married. In 1959, he started with the Metropolitan Transport Commission in Hobart, Transport Trust, as a cleaner in April 1959. But he always wanted to get on the trams, really. So almost exactly a year later, he qualifies to be a conductor, and so he's conducting on the trams in Hobart. And 3 weeks later, on the 31st of August 1960, he was conducting on tram 131 going up Elizabeth Street in Hobart. And near the top of the hill at Hobart, if anyone knows Elizabeth Street, they know it's quite steep. The tram collided with a truck, and in that collision, all the controlling gears and the brakes became inoperable. The driver himself was dazed and thrown to the ground. So Ray went up to the front to see if he could help, assist in any way, as you would do. There was about 50 people on the tram at this stage. And because the brakes were inoperable, it started to slowly fall back down the hill. And Ray tried to calm all the people, and it's gaining speed all the time. So he goes to the other end, the front end of what is now the tram going downhill, and he's trying to keep all the people calm while he's ringing the gong to warn cars, anybody in the way, because it's a very busy area. And this is gaining speed all the time. It's about 15 tonnes. At one stage, one of the cars sees him in difficulty and is driving down beside it, blowing his own horn to warn people as well. He got to about 70 kilometres an hour, and the tram started to pull away from him. So it gives you some idea of the speed this uncontrolled 15-tonne tram with 50 people on board was travelling. It's hitting cars left, right and centre. At the bottom of the hill is a stationary tram on the same line. So, and he's acutely aware of this. He's trying to warn everybody possible and try to make sure that at least people on that tram are going to get away. And in the last, there was a colleague on there, and he told the colleague to go and look after the passengers, get them up the back, because he knew when it hit, it was going to hit in no uncertain terms. And the last the colleague saw of Ray was him putting his arms up. In the tram looking up was a learner driver, and I have no idea what was going through the mind of this learner driver. But in the last few seconds, him and Ray locked eyes between the windows, and the driver and the learner driver managed to jump off before the impact. But that millisecond of recognition must have been absolutely a terrible experience for this driver. So through all this period, Raymond Donahue knew he was going to die.
Yeah.
In those last few seconds, he shields his face. The trams collide. They concertina by about 3 metres and travel another city block before it finally comes to rest. He's killed instantly. But because of him, it's a miracle that there were some serious injuries, but no other loss of life. And it was all thanks to him. And there was a large inquiry, as you can imagine, and the inquiry found that he sacrificed his own life for the people on the tram, and he left a widow and 7 children. And sadly, one of those children was born 3 weeks after he was killed. So the cost is incalculable to the community and to Ray's family, obviously, who had to move on from that point.
And it's a special quality, and one that can be hard perhaps for people to relate to, of that, I guess, willingness to really see something so difficult through to the very end, not, I guess, and putting others before one's own safety. And it's something, I guess, that through all of these awards and honours we do value, but it is rare. I mean, 28 Australians over a long period have received these awards. But stories like that, I think, can be difficult for people to relate to, simply because it is really going above and beyond, isn't it?
And it's when I was writing this book and with Britton and the other guys, one of the questions kept coming back to me: why don't I know about this? Why was this forgotten so quickly? About 6 months later, the Hobart tram system that they used at the time fell into disuse, and it was the end of that particular tram system. But this is where we see it's the costs are not only borne by the hero, I suppose we call him. It's borne by a community. It's borne by families. But it doesn't always have to be a posthumous award where the costs are high. And we find this with Tim Britton and Richard Joyce in Bali. On the 12th of October 2002, Jemaah Islamiyah detonate 2 bombs in Bali, in the Kuta district of Bali, and caused devastation. And this is where we see Richard Joyce. He's a geologist. He's there with 3 of his uni guys, mates from uni. They've met up. They've gone to Bali for a holiday. There's Tim Hawkins, Ben Davis and Stuart Anstey and Richard Joyce, and they go to Bali. And on the day of this explosion, Tim, Ben and Stuart had gone to the Sari Club, which was the focus of one of the bombs, for a few beers and to get together. Unfortunately, Richard felt pretty crook, so he stayed home that day. And at just after 11 o'clock, he's awoken by this massive explosion that rocks his hotel room. The windows shatter, lights go out, and he could see this huge cloud. So, like everybody, a lot of other people, they go out to see what happened, and he's met with this tide of people that are just horrific wounds and blood and panic just coming away. And the first thing he thinks about was his 3 friends. He knows something terrible has happened. So he's pushing against this geologist from Western Australia. He's pushing against this tide of people to get to his friends. So he helps where he can, and he's getting whatever he can find to help stem the blood flow of people. And he finds himself outside the ruins of the Sari Club, and there he meets Tim Britton, who's already been into the Sari Club. It was an inferno, this burning inferno, and he's found this woman in there, but he can't get her out. She's trapped. So he meets Richard and said, "Look, she's going to die if you don't help me. Can you give me a hand?" And Richard said, "Fine, yes, let's do this." So Richard and Richard and Tim, they go back into the burning club. They find the woman, but the heat's getting so intense. They cannot get this detritus off the woman. She's trapped. The skin on Tim's arms is starting to blister through the heat. So they're forced back outside. So when they get outside, there's some people there that douse them with water. And when they immediately come back in. And when they come back in, they're almost beaten back again, but she just comes free right as they're about to give up hope. And she's unable to speak at this stage. She's alive but unable to speak. And they take her out and they hand her over to some waiting people. And then they immediately go back in again to look for survivors. But there's only the dead left inside the club itself. And they spend the next hour or so picking up the wounded and taking them to triage areas and places of relative safety. And this comes out in both their stories of this period where here's Tim, he's using a fireman's carry to carry these terribly mutilated people. And here's Richard with him, comforting them as best he can, holding their mutilated bodies together. And they get them there. And these stories can get to you, I'd say. And about they get one woman there, and this is what Richard really got to him. Just as they put her on the truck, she dies. So they've got to drag her off the truck and put someone living back on there. And they do this for a while, and these guys in the singlets and shorts in this inferno. Tim Britton himself has got glass embedded in his feet, and he's still carrying this people. So, and then after about an hour, then Richard goes away to look for his friends. And Tim stays there with the authorities to help in any way he possibly can. And over the next few days, Richard finds two of his friends, Ben Davis and Stuart Anstey. He finds two of them in different hospitals. But he never did find Tim Hawkins. And Tim was killed in the blast. His remains were found later. And Tim Hawkins has a scholarship in the University of Tasmania Memorial Scholarship, Faculty of Law. He was a terribly popular sportsman, terribly popular lawyer. And about 12 months later, it's announced on the 12-month anniversary of the bombing, it's announced that Richard and Tim had been awarded the Cross of Valour. And the journalists tried to get their opinion on it, as you'd think. And Richard said, look, it's a real honour, but it's still too raw. It really is hard to feel happy about the award.
Yeah.
And with Tim, he wears, obviously, he's Australia's highest awarded serving police officer, and he obviously awards. He's proud of the award, but he never smiles in a photograph if he's wearing the medal, because of what it means to so many people. It's such a dark shadow on so many people's lives. So he's Tim Britton. He's helps with mental awareness now amongst police officers, because it had a profound effect on most of them. And on the 12-month anniversary at Kings Park in Perth, the journalists and newspapers were told to keep away, to just not. It was still too raw for them. Richard himself, he went on a world trip to try and forget. He got as far as Canada and met his wife, and that's where he is today. Tim is still serving with the Western Australian Police Force. He's a senior sergeant now, and him and Richard, although they're a long way apart, they remain very close friends to this day. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you a question, but before I do, I'll just remind people that they can send their questions through for Craig using the chat window or the Q&A window at the bottom of your screen. So please do send those through. It's really good to hear your sort of insights and have you tell the stories of people who've been given these awards. And I wondered, I guess we've got some that date back to actions from sort of 1915 onwards. So you're looking at historical information to write the book, but did you have the opportunity to speak to any of the recipients as you were writing the book? And, why or why not? And how was that process for you of going through all of these stories? Because they are quite full on, many of them. And
Yes.
So it must have had a bit of an emotional toll on you to I guess, delve into all of these experiences.
Yeah, in a word, yes. You figuratively sort of walk in their footsteps a little bit, which is nowhere near what they went through, obviously. But I was lucky enough to be in touch with all 6 surviving recipients. Michael Pratt, the sole surviving George Cross recipient, he was awarded for actions trying to foil a bank robbery in 1976, and the 5 Cross of Valour guys, and all remarkable guys. And you talk to them, and it's not like preparing for a battle. These things fall out of the sky. They're unprepared for them. They don't know. All they know is someone needs help. And just like the Victoria Cross, when inspiration's needed, these guys stepped up.
Yeah. So, as we've mentioned a couple of times, the first award, George Cross, was given for an action in 1915.
Yeah.
But they weren't introduced until 1941. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so can you explain how does it work to, I guess, award or recognise people for actions that might have happened decades earlier? Can you tell us a bit about the process?
I can.
Yeah.
The George Cross, the history of the George Cross is a fairly messy one. It's not a coherent chronological order in many ways. A few years after the Victoria Cross was instituted, they created the Albert Medal. Now, this was specifically for saving life on sea, and a short while later they had the Albert Medal for saving life on land. So they started to recognise these acts of bravery that really had nothing to do with war. And over the coming decades or century, I guess, more awards were created, like the Edward Medal, and in 1922 the Conspicuous Gallantry Medal. But the Albert Medal was always billed as the civilian Victoria Cross almost. But a lot of these subsequent awards from one time or another would be touted as the civilian Victoria Cross. And when it came around to the Second World War, King George VI looked at all these existing awards, and none of them were really applicable to what he was seeing anywhere. Now, even though the Albert Medal was touted as the civilian equivalent of the Victoria Cross, the Victoria Cross was first on the order of wear, is the order that you wear them. The Albert Medal had slipped down to 13th or 14th place, or whatever, something like that. So it really didn't correlate to that, and it was specifically for saving life. A lot of this for Gallantry, a lot of the stories in For Gallantry doesn't directly go to saving life. So, but there's degrees of separation there. So King George VI created this new award that he placed directly beside the Victoria Cross, so there could be no question about, okay, in a circumstance of extreme courage, in great peril, we have got a preeminent award to do that. So when they did that, the Empire Gallantry Medal was absorbed into it, and existing recipients were from that point deemed George Cross, so there's exchange awards. And then you had, in 1971, the Albert Medal and the Edward Medal were both discontinued. And again, surviving recipients of those awards were deemed from that point to be George Cross recipients. And that is how we get Richard Richards' actions in Antarctica in 1915, awarded the George Cross for actions that happened decades beforehand.
Okay.
Yes.
And so that's a great summary of, I guess, how the George Cross has perhaps replaced some of the others. But today we do still have simultaneous George Cross and Cross of Valour recipients. So that's because the Australian award was introduced, but people can still be awarded the George Cross if they're not Australian. Is that the
George Cross is an Imperial award. Yeah. It's a British award. In 1991, the Victoria Cross was incorporated within the Australian Honours and Awards system as the Victoria Cross for Australia. So they retained that pedigree, I guess, back to 1856. With the George Cross from 1992, all Imperial awards were from that point deemed to be, the words escape me completely now. I was going to say alien awards, but it's not alien. It was no longer an Australian award.
Okay.
So Michael Pratt was our last George Cross.
Yeah.
So there won't be another one unless it is awarded to a foreign award. That's the word I was trying. Sorry, peeps. The foreign award. So if an Australian was awarded a George Cross by the British government, they could proudly wear it. And in the order of wear, it still comes after the Victoria Cross. So if you were to win the Victoria Cross, the George Cross, and the Cross of Valour, it would still, even though it's a foreign award, it would still go in that order. And I mean, if you won all three, you'd probably have Hollywood knocking on your door anyway.
Yeah.
But we have a little bit of an odd system, or we did up to 92, where we had our Australian Honours and Awards system, but we sort of incorporated the British Imperial system among it.
Yeah.
So it caused a bit of confusion for a little while.
Well, we've had a question from Ian which relates, and he says that he's heard that the George Cross is sort of classed as the equivalent, so at the same level as the VC.
That's great.
But also in relation to the order of wear, but you're describing that there is still a hierarchy. So can you just clarify?
There's long been a bit of a discussion, really. Does the George Cross come after the Victoria Cross? Is it beside the Victoria Cross? Now, when it was in the speech by King George VI, when he created the George Cross, he specifically said it sits next to the Victoria Cross. So, when questions in the House in England during the Second World War, where people were maybe saying, well, why don't we just make the Victoria Cross available to civilians or actions away from the battlefield, as it had been done in the past? And Winston Churchill said, no, the George Cross is the equivalent of the Victoria Cross. And just last year, the sort of discussion sort of went for decades, and it's still bubbling along. And just last year, Queen Elizabeth herself said, no, they are the same. Yes. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Thank you.
Okay.
It does. So I did want to ask about the representation of women in these awards and honours, because there are no women featured in For Gallantry, so no Australian women awarded.
No Australian women awarded. There have been 13 women awarded the George Cross, none to Australians, unfortunately. Three awards went to Special Operations Executive recipients, and they're the women that went behind the lines during the Second World War. Extraordinarily brave women, and two of them were caught and executed. The third one survived, luckily, but it's hard to comprehend the bravery of being parachuted in behind the lines and acting as an insurgent and doing the sort of things. The last direct award of a George Cross to a woman was a Barbara Hamilton, I believe, and she went into a burning plane in an airport in England, and to try and save people on the plane that was on fire, and she went on more than one occasion, and she just didn't come out the last. So extraordinarily courageous women. Nancy Wake, the White Mouse, many people might recognise her name. She was awarded a George Medal for her courage as a Special Operations Executive, but no, she didn't get the George Cross. But the George Medal was made available for wider distribution, but it's still an extraordinarily high threshold to get it. So, answer to your question.
Thank
Yeah.
you. I wanted to ask about so I think the Bali bombings example was a really good one to highlight, a recent awarding of these honours, and it was sort of making me reflect on a lot of the stories that we think about for both the Victoria Cross and the George Cross.
Yes.
Do relate to perhaps First and Second World War type time frames, whether it's on the battlefield or not. Black and white photos of gallantry, which is a word that we don't speak about often today.
No.
And so, I was hoping to sort of get your reflections on how our thoughts about gallantry may have changed over time. Is it awarded less now? Is the barrier a bit higher because of our modern society? Do you have any reflections on that after writing the book?
I could go back to my initial comments here, where we talk about bravery and we talk about gallantry. They're very, like valour and gallantry, they're very evocative terms. And because part of the human condition is this ongoing narrative of conflict, that usually comes to the fore. They are our Victoria Cross guys are commemorated and celebrated for very good reason. But in the civilian sphere, away from that narrative, they're isolated incidents that aren't sort of brought to the fore to any great extent from
Perhaps
time to time.
Maybe at a 10-year anniversary of an event of the Bali bombings and the 20-year.
Perhaps
there are those reflections, but otherwise...
Bali bombing may be slightly different because it really is in the public consciousness. I think in living memory, most people can remember the Bali bombings and the terrible loss of life, 88 Australians.
But other actions, I guess, might not be witnessed by many people at all, and so it doesn't have that same place in the public.
No, it doesn't.
Psyche.
No, it doesn't. We have Darryl Tree, who was the first recipient of the Cross of Valour, and to give you some idea about just how little known, perhaps, or little invested we were for quite some time in this extraordinarily prestigious award. It took 14 years for the first one to be awarded. Yeah. That was Darryl Tree. And when I was reading Darryl Tree's, when I was researching Darryl Tree's story, and I spoke to Darryl on a number of occasions, it's a lovely fella. And I'm just... It was one of those moments where I really did think, what would I have done?
Yeah.
Here, it's an electrified crane, its jibs up against high tension wires. There's a young child trapped on the crane.
The tyres, the rubber tyres, are the only thing saving this child from being electrocuted. There's a frantic father on the ground that just wants to reach out to his child, as you can imagine they would do. So Daryl knew as soon as he touched him, he was dead.
Yeah.
So Daryl went in there and he kept the father away as much as he could, and he said, let's look at this another way. Let's get some rope. We'll see if we can lift him off.
Yeah.
And Daryl goes and gets some rope. He comes back. He turns around from his Land Rover. He sees the father reaching out to the child. Immediately, the father falls to the ground, stunned, and but luckily the child was left.
Yeah.
Although badly shocked, as you can imagine, he was left. So the father wakes up again and immediately tries to go back to the child, and Daryl tries to hold him back, at which stage he gets pushed back onto the crane himself. So again, this explosion just blows them back straight down onto the ground. Now, this is happening, and he wakes up again. The father's unconscious by this stage, but on the second occasion, the child starts to slip down the mudguard of the crane. The power is arcing through the child's head and into the ground. He could see this. And he thought to himself, there's only one thing I can do here. He'd already experienced what this electricity was going to do. Touch it and you get blown away.
Yeah.
You know. So the only thing that he could think of was, if I grab that child hard enough, we'll both get blown away.
Yeah.
And that's what he did. He put himself into a situation where he was arched back so that when it hit, his natural position would throw them clear of the crane. And this is what he did. He got himself into a position. He reached out, grabbed the child, and just everything went black. A few minutes later, he regains consciousness. He's blown about 2 metres away. The young child's about 3 metres away. The young child and the dad, neither are breathing now. So he goes to the dad, who's been unconscious longest, gives mouth to mouth, and he starts to respond. And he goes to the child, and by this stage he's hoping rather than believing he can bring this child back. He gives him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. The child comes back from the brink, by which time the father has stopped breathing. He goes back to the father, and the father's gone. There's nothing he can do for him. By which stage he couldn't feel his hands anymore. They were shaking and all the rest of it. Anthony Dolphin, his nephew, was there, had gone to get an ambulance. And Anthony himself, at one stage when Daryl was unconscious, Daryl had tried to get the child off by using a long piece of plastic pipe. But unfortunately it was wet, and he himself got burnt, and he was awarded a bravery award himself for his actions. So it came back. Daryl lost one of his toes. There were hundreds of entry and exit holes of electricity burned out of his feet. The muscles contracted so hard that they crushed vertebrae in his back. So he was never the same again. The young bloke, he survived. He lost 2 toes on one of his feet, and he's a teacher now. They've lost contact, but he's a teacher now. But Daryl paid for it the rest of his life, emotionally and physically.
Yeah.
It was an awful long road back for him.
And it's quite amazing to hear how, I guess, in that moment, having the clarity of thought to make, try to make the safest decisions that you can in a really dangerous situation, but to sort of be in that situation, really be able to make good choices is
To be able
it's
to make a
amazing
choice
to put it
where if he stays there, he dies.
Yeah.
If I do nothing, he dies. If I do something, we both might die.
Yeah.
But unless I do, at least we have a chance of living.
Yeah.
So all these must have been going through his head.
Yeah.
He knew he was on a precipice.
And trying to keep the father away, and because his natural instinct was taking over, such a difficult situation.
Yeah. So it's, why don't we know about this?
Yeah.
Why did it take a book? I don't know. Yeah.
Well, thank you. So it is just about time for us to wrap up, but I did want to ask very quickly, as we mentioned earlier, Anzac Day, Remembrance Day, Victoria Cross and other military medals are worn, but when do people who have been awarded the George Cross or Cross of Valour have the opportunity to wear theirs? Are there moments where that is...
Yeah, at official functions, they will wear their medals, and it could be if they're meeting the Governor General, and these Cross of Valour and George Cross recipients do get invited to speak. A lot of them are motivational speakers, like Alan Sparks, incredibly brave. He was a senior police constable, but he's a motivational speaker now. On the strength of this, it's part of his journey back from the depths of where he found himself after his action. With the Victoria Cross and George Cross Association in London has a meeting every 2 years where all recipients attend. They go over there, they have travel allowances and things to get there. And they will wear their original medal groups, particularly if they're going to meet the Queen. They will wear those. Otherwise, it's usually a replica group, and they will keep their originals safe and sound. The Cross of Valour guys, with Tim Britton, he sold his group, and a part of the reason he did was to try and put the ghost of Bali behind him.
Yeah.
So he was a replica group. But, Victor Bosco, Darryl Tree, Alan Sparks, the Bali guys, and Michael Pratt, it was just such a privilege to talk to them. It was just great.
Well, thank you, and thanks for your time this morning and sharing the stories with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So that brings our Museum at Home webinar to a close. We hope that you enjoyed the presentation this morning. So if you haven't already, please search for the Australian War Memorial on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and you can find more stories from the Australian War Memorial there. That's all we have time for. Thanks again for joining us. Bye for now.